Good morning. On behalf of the Age-Friendly University of Minnesota Council, welcome to our third annual Age-Friendly University Day. Thank you especially to the returners. My name is Rajan Moon, and I serve as the Associate Director for Policy in the Center for Healthy Aging and Innovation, and I'm privileged to serve as one of the co-leads, along with my colleague, Alicia Wolf, who's standing in the back, for the Age-Friendly University of Minnesota Council. The Council is comprised of 14 programs and services from across the Twin Cities campus designed to engage lifelong learners and support intergenerational connections. Our council believes that we all benefit from intergenerational approaches and exchanges, that lifelong learners bring experience and perspective that enrich education, that diversity, equity, and inclusion are central pillars to all the work we do, and that ageism is a pervasive form of bigotry that must be challenged and eliminated. You can find a member, yes, that is an important one, right? You can find a member of the council by a ribbon on our name badge if you'd like more information. I'd like to take a moment to welcome attendees from across the state who are participating virtually, including our age-friendly university friends at the University of Minnesota Duluth. This year, we're offering the morning keynote panel and our first breakout session virtually, so Minnesotans can attend from all across the state. We have a full day planned for you that's going to go fast. But first, it's really important to recognize today is made possible by the support from the medical school's Minnesota North Star Geriatrics Workforce Enhancement Program, the Center for Healthy Aging and Innovation, AARP Minnesota, the Age-Friendly Minnesota Council, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, Leading Age Minnesota, and the university's Office for Equity and Diversity, as well as a number of partners that are hosting exhibit booths behind you. I'd also like to thank Trellis through Juniper for hosting Tai Chi Kwan this morning. How many people participated in Tai Chi? Did you have a blast? It's a great opportunity. Worked up that breakfast appetite, I think so. Now I'm very privileged and happy to introduce the Dean of our medical school and Vice President of Clinical Affairs to offer a welcome on behalf of the university community, Dean Tolar.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a great morning. It's beautiful. Thank you all for being here, and I am honored to be able to share with you a couple of minutes of this age-friendly day at the University of Minnesota. If there is one thing that you will remember from my very short comments, it is that your lives, and my life, everybody's life, is written in pencil, not in pen. It's fluid, and it's fixable. Before I get to this, though, I want to say the obvious, which is that the demographics of the state, of the whole mankind, is changing, that we have more and more older people. And that is so good, because that is, almost without exception, because of science. Because of science that went to public health, science that went to understanding what kind of diseases we get as we age. And the three most common are vascular, stroke and heart, neurodegeneration, and cancer, my day job. So the number one risk for all of them is age. It seems like a bad news, but the good news is that here at this university, we have the honor of actually having people who have participated enough and shown enough understanding of the process that we may be able to capture what drives all of these three processes, which again, is the majority of what we do in the hospital, in the clinic, and when we take care of many of us, many of you. And the opportunity to have many people that are able to live active life to the 80s, 90s, and 100s is a tremendous non-medical advance as well. I have learned personally how to live my life from people that are many, many decades older than I have been, since I've been little. Sometimes my relatives, sometimes my teachers, sometimes people that you just happen to gather with and learn from. And I think that it's a tremendous opportunity to counter some of the society-wide distraction that we have with social media, that we have with the rapidity of the life today. And I think that that calming influence of long-lived experience and expertise is incredibly important in the emotional way, in the scientific way, and in education, the whole communities, such as this one. So at this university, we have more than 10,000 people that are older than 50. I am one of them, okay? It's about 2,500 faculty. It's about 6,000 staff. And, wait for it, more than 1,000 of students. That's perfect. I like that learning doesn't stop, when you get these degrees and finish up schools, and that continues, and that's that collective learning that allows me to share with you just a snippet of what I just started unveiling for you. Many of you know that, so I apologize if I repeat something, but the big change in aging, in understanding of aging, is that it's not inevitable. As I said, it's fluid and fixable. We were able to see this as we see many disease processes or injuries and so forth. Unpack this and understand a couple things. One is that senescent cells live in our organs and accumulate with time. The senescent basically means old. And these cells don't divide as they are supposed to when we rejuvenate, our skin, our liver, our brain, and so forth. They don't divide, so they don't help, but they also don't die, which is the bigger problem. Because the not dying, not being sort of cleaned up, from our muscles, from our skin, from our liver, triggers exhaustion of immune system. Everybody knows about immune system, really important for vaccinations, really important for infectious diseases, really important for really well-functioning organs. So what happens is that the immune system, as we age, ages as well, and these senescent cells trigger inflammation. It's not different from the inflammation that we get with, flu or with cuts or after surgery. It's very similar. The problem is that the immune system gets exhausted and yet does not do the job of clearing these cells away from these tissues. Still good? Still with me? Okay. So the term that brings these two systems together, inflammation and aging, is called inflammaging. Simple, right? I didn't invent that, so I can say that. And the good news is that Dr. Robbins and Dr. Niedenhofer, who I was grateful to be able to attract to this university some 5-6 years ago, are leading team in devising ways how to get these senescent cells out of our tissues. So you can think of this as a crate of apples. I have apples, in my basement, and, if one gets rotten, I better take it out so that the other ones don't get afflicted the same way. That's the same thing. And the good news is that these medications, some of them are natural products. They are like in cashew nuts or something. When we take them, we can take out these senescent cells, help the immune system not get exhausted, and the tissues rejuvenate on their own. So now it seems that the common denominator, as I said, for cancer, vascular events in the brain and in the heart, and the neurodegenerations can be answered by the same approach of eliminating these senescent cells. Pretty good, don't you think? All right. So this is magnificent because it's not talking about the lifespan alone. It is one of the, in my opinion, highest achievements of mankind, that because of science, we have doubled lifespan in a century. Between 1900s and 2000, it's approximately doubled. It's unbelievable on its own. But now the job is that we have to increase the health span within that lifespan, which means that, as we all know, as we age, majority of our time in hospitals and in the hands of physicians is in the last 2 years of our life. So the idea is that one can preserve all that functions of the abdominal organs, of the brain, all the mentation and everything with the help of science. And that alone, I think, is incredibly positive and incredibly helpful to us all. So if you, anybody of you have any questions about this, you can email me or you can talk to Hoden over there, and she will get me, and I'll get you the information that you may actually enjoy, and you may actually get some understanding from what the work at this university has contributed to mankind. At the same time, I'm delighted that the work on aging has been awarded by the federal funding agencies. Dr. Pakala, who sits over there, who is our head of family medicine, got some big grants. Dr. Gogler, I don't know, I don't see Joe, but he got $5 million for his center. This is a focus of the society, not just in North America, but absolutely everywhere, because that is what we will need collectively to really approach this enormous opportunity of having so many people in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s, and how best collectively capture that opportunity and present all of you and all of the people that are like us with the higher quality of living and with the biggest gift that I think we can give to each other, which is the gift of time. As an oncologist, again, I always think about this. If things go well, the children that I treat, or teenagers, they will have their children. The older generation, they will actually see their daughters at the wedding. The time is the highest quality goods that I can think of. And that's why we are here. And I am told by Dawn and Faye that I had an honor to speak, as we were waiting for the hot water that didn't arrive in time for me anyway, that they are returning people to this age-friendly day at the university. And I think that that's another important psychological glue. Any questions for me? No? There will be a test at the end. Oh, there is a question. Yes, ma'am. Okay. I'll send it to you. Hoden, can you get connection there? Yes, I will. There are several. I don't want to trivialize this. I really need to give you the full explanation of this. And there are several, some medications, that are, again, these are like natural products. They are called fisetin. It's in the cashew nuts. I take it every day because I worry that my wife may see my decline, and I don't want that. So, but yes, I'll be happy to share that. Any other questions for me? Yes, ma'am. Senescent cell. SENESCENT. It's not easy for me because English is my fourth language, so thank you for bearing with my spelling. Any other questions? If not, have a phenomenal day. Thank you for everything who you are and what you do. Thank you for making our lives better.
Thank you, Dean Toller. I also think perhaps I heard a breakout session for next year with perhaps Dr. Niederhofer and Dr. Robbins. So we'll send that invite out. So as I said this morning, we have an exciting and engaging program for you. And following the program, both our keynote and our panel, I'll be back to provide more details about the events occurring throughout the day so that you have a nice little roadmap. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report detailing what they were calling the epidemic of loneliness and isolation across the lifespan. And today we're going to tackle this topic, but from a different perspective. Really, how can we combat isolation as we all age? And I'm very happy to introduce our keynote this morning, Dr. Alyson VanAhn. Dr. VanAhn is a licensed psychologist with the Associated Clinics of Psychology, and she helps people by fostering hope and providing small ways to make big changes that last. Her job is to foster change, no matter what circumstances, and to motivate the people around her to maximize the chances change can happen. Dr. VanAhn.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajan. I am humbled and very honored to be here. My role, my day job is as a psychologist, and for the last 10 plus years, I've worked for the Associated Clinic of Psychology, moving between different senior care facilities all week to try to enhance the lives of the residents and support staff in doing so. And I just feel so fortunate that ACP, my company, was picked to do this, and I got to be the one to show up. I have to say that I have actually, as a Minnesotan, never set foot in here. It's a beautiful and impressive place. Just hearing a little bit of the science that you got a taste of a moment ago, I am very humbled by that, and I have to come out that I went to Wisconsin as an undergrad. However, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to be here with you all and so grateful you're gathered. This is really important. I want to just provide another kind of spin on the continuation of science for today. What we want you to experience is all really in the title. We want you to actually find joy today in this community. I've already heard people buzzing around literally the water coolers and reconnecting after some time, connecting for the first time. By nature, you're going to hear stories. You're going to have a long list of resources, just looking at our sponsors, you've already started that will hopefully spark your engagement and improve your own social connection. We're doing this because of the joint missions of all the good folks and companies, large and small, that are sponsoring this event. We're doing this because of the person sitting next to you. Everybody comes here with a context, the struggles that they're finding in life in general, with things that happen as we age in particular. There's also people online tuning in that have their own context as well. We really want to improve and have an experience today that you can take beyond this room. The Surgeon General's warning really was a big piece in accentuating and highlighting how big of a risk loneliness and isolation are. And we also learned some very hard lessons from the pandemic. I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one. You all had your own experience. For me, I felt like anecdotally just as many people died of isolation in senior care facilities as COVID. So there's a lot more to say on that. We have a lot of reasons why to gather here. Our how is gathering IRL, as my 13-year-old would say. That means in real life. Here we are. Or having the option to do that and connect digitally, which is also so important. So let's take advantage of all those opportunities. We've got a wonderful panel that's going to highlight some local efforts that are ongoing and historical, some strategies for building connection for yourself and bringing connection to others, and then the breakout groups and time for connection with nourishment, which is always important. Our hope really is that you leave with a couple of things today. New information, which is always good. I think you've probably gotten some of that already. connection to each other via some shared stories and certainly resources. And then practice so that you can build confidence in going from here and continuing to make connections for yourself and taking action steps to bring those to others. Speaking of science, we've heard some really exciting things that have been going on at the university. I want to echo the idea that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. There's been a lot of research done in how to age well and how to prevent disease. Beyond the medical studies, we've also got some good psychological science. And over decades of research, but highlighted and punctuated recently with COVID and all things that have increased our isolation, loneliness and isolation are different, but they both impact quite a bit. Loneliness turns out to actually be a discrepancy between what you would like or expect for social connection and what you actually have. So you can be alone and not be lonely at all, or you can be amongst hundreds of people and feel extremely lonely. You don't have to be an extrovert to have social connection either. More on that in a moment. Social isolation is really a lack of regular contact with others. It doesn't mean that you don't like being social. It may mean that you don't like being social. It's a different concept, however, and they both pose some risk. They've had a number of studies demonstrate that our loneliness in the States, but also globally, has increased over the last several decades in a number of categories. There's a lot of individual health risks that come with it, it turns out, and we've got more and more science coming that seems to reinforce not just cardiovascular impact, but also brain impact. So things like mental health, we know that there's a rise in depression and anxiety for folks who are lonely and socially isolated. Also, it puts people at a greater risk for dementia. And then there's the longevity impact. The quest has for a long time been to live longer and improve our longevity. But what we know about loneliness and social isolation is that mortality rates are increased by loneliness and isolation as much or more than if we all smoked 15 cigarettes a day, if we had been overweight or very inactive for a long time. We've done tremendous things to decrease smoking and other risk factors. This is why the Surgeon General has labeled it a public health epidemic and crisis. It turns out that poor health increased your risk for being lonely or socially isolated. That doesn't seem like rocket science. Often it has to do with functional limitations, lack of access, lack of people having access to you. Older adults are certainly on the list of having increased risk. You can see that these risk factors blend together. Younger folks are also on that list, actually, for a number of reasons in another talk. People who have lower financial means, lower socioeconomic status, and those who've been marginalized in groups that are often discriminated against or facing hardship anyway, certainly on the list for being lonely and isolated at a greater rate. And then the community impact. Well, what does that mean? If you think about the community you live in, you work in, and look around, if there are places to gather, that's a protective factor. If there are safe ways to get there, that's a protective factor. What are the resources that you have in your own community? Today, we're in a community here with an abundance of resources. So we're going to utilize it to the best of our ability to bring those back with us. The good news, like there is good news about aging, there's ways to decrease these risks. The ultimate prescription we actually have for loneliness is finding some inspiration simply in those two words, what we've all been talking about already and will continue to the rest of today: social connection. meeting with people, gathering, any kind imaginable. And it doesn't have to be in a neat package that looks like it would for your neighbor. Discovering enjoyment somewhere is important. Sharing greetings. This is relevant as I watch some kids go by. Some of the kids in the pandemic learned to walk away and out of the way of strangers so as not to have social contact. We want to get back to greeting each other, meeting with healthcare providers, going to follow-up appointments, being connected. They are resource houses for so many things for wellness. Figuring out what are your values and doing something that's aligned with those. Whether it's volunteering as an extrovert, you might want to go to some gathering and do something that's very socially active, or a community hangout. Do you have those? This has become one today. Are there places that you can go? How do you do with asking for help? That turns out to be one of the quick 5 that the Surgeon General suggests to combat loneliness. Asking for assistance. It doesn't sound hard, but if you're like so many of the rest of us, we're more used to providing assistance. Well, there's room for that too. Assisting others not only connects you socially, but brings them connection that would have otherwise been missed, likely. We can do that through service and volunteering. There's a number of resources today on the end of my slides, and I think throughout the programming about places to volunteer. Expressing gratitude turns out to be really helpful. In my job, I often hear that I'm very young or don't have to worry about the things that my clients are going through, which is true. I'm in a different phase of life, but I do leave feeling grateful for things like having 2 arms and 2 legs that work, having lungs that help me breathe. And those are things that are basic and exponentially important, it turns out. If you like animals, you can work with animals, bring those to others. Finding meaning is the key. You've probably heard about retirement risks and people feeling like they get a little depressed after retirement. Some of that we know comes from losing that sense of meaning or purpose. You can get that anywhere. You can get that in outdoor spaces, as many of you did this morning, which is a wonderful experience to provide. You can get that actually by smiling. I don't know if you all have noticed, this is a really smiley group, which is wonderful. And it's actually in contrast to what I feel like I see on a regular basis. I work with a lot of hardworking people in senior care facilities, and they often have their heads down and they're rushed to the next task. And it's not that they're unfriendly, but we have not rewarded any smiling for a while, and so we have to re-practice that. Policies and norms are important for social connection. Are you interested in those? Then think about getting involved in some of those. But making it simple is also important. So we want you to have actionable steps today to take, whether that means going to a gym. I know some of you are participating digitally, which is wonderful. Accepting help is a skill that a lot of us need to get better at, but it actually provides a protective factor to reduce loneliness and isolation. Communing with neighbors. Schools are often a good gathering and resource place for social connection. Simply showing up turns out to be a big piece of the pie as well. So you've already done that. You have already socially connected here. If you take away nothing else, that's helpful for not only improving your well-being and buffering against loneliness, but also bringing it to other people. You're going to leave with a lot of ways to do that. So what can you do? How can we make these concrete? The good news is there's a lot of simple and straightforward ways to do this. And in Minnesota, as you've already heard, we have tons of environments to support strong connections. Today is a perfect example. There's sponsor activities that will go beyond here. There's booths and places for you to gather and get to know each other. We have press that supports this. Some of you may have read the Star and Tribune's series on ending loneliness, which had some wonderful suggestions I would highly recommend. And we have good physical environments to gather here. Minnesota's often on the top of the list for providing those. Please use today for building social connection. Again, you've already started. And finding places to show up. Things that you want to do that will bring you joy, and how to access those that maybe can't get there. For you, making something local, personal to you, something that's meaningful, you've already done it, as we mentioned. Engaging yourself and challenging yourself to sustain some action is the key. This really is medicine. You can be your own medicine. We've got other really smart people working on the pills and the other things for ending some of these difficult things that become big risk factors, loneliness and isolation being one. From psychology, we know if you make it specific, you're more likely to do it. If you make it easy, same thing. If you tend to think about and think, I'm not sure if this one would be right for me or that thing would be right for me to do, the idea of less thinking and more doing might be a mantra. I have that one as well. From the Surgeon General, they've got a wonderful 5-task deal that says just these things can increase your social connection and provide buffers against social isolation and loneliness. Assisting, accepting help, yes, it's actually on there, offering support to others, and expressing gratitude. Psychology has always wanted to be a real science, and this is a place where it is. We've got lots of hard data, and we've got probably your own personal experiences. My last 2 slides here, which I will make available to you for resources, are a good dash in the pot of what we've got for opportunities locally. And I would encourage you to just take action, including places where people can gather. There's one here about letters against isolation that a couple of kids developed during the pandemic, where you can write letters to people in nursing homes. And I've also got my resources so you can read more around the things that the Surgeon General had to say, the CDC, and that Star Tribune article, among many, many others. I want to get you to our expert panel who is going to launch us on a wonderful rest of your day to give us the gear to continue to take action, connect, and combat some of these difficult risks we're facing. Thank you so much. If I had gone to the U, I would have remembered my computer.
Clearly, that's true.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name's Christina Cobble. I'm part of the Age-Friendly University Council here. And I'm excited to have a conversation with these folks and all of you today on the topic of finding joy in community and overcoming loneliness. So I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we'll go ahead and get started. The full bios are in your booklets, so feel free to refer to those. So I'm going to start with James here on the end. He's the executive director of Friends & Co. formerly known as Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly. Some of you may know them by that name. And that's a nonprofit organization that works to combat social isolation across the state of Minnesota. Here in the middle, we have Linda Camp. She's an independent contractor, writer, and researcher. Her work focuses on strategic planning, systems analysis, and change management, with her current focus being on solo older adults. And here we have Sherry Pugh. She's the chair of the Governor's Council on an Age-Friendly Minnesota and has a 35-year career in housing and community economic development, focused on development of affordable housing and enterprise development. So let's welcome our panel. Well, panelists, my first question for you is really kind of hitting on our keynote speakers conversation today, and that's just considering your backgrounds and experiences, how do you define joy in community, and why is it particularly relevant to the well-being of older adults? James, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Christina. So defining joy in community is a challenge. I mean, when I think about the way I live in community and the things that bring me joy, I think about, these connections that I have to family members, to friends, and the connections that I have. And to me, I almost feel like I need to do more time studying and thinking about that. But when I think about what the negative effects are, if I can go there, why we want to be really concerned about social connection from a community-wide perspective is, I think one reason is there are a number of people who have what I would call minority political views, and the way for them to be successful advancing their agendas is to divide and conquer. And to the degree that we are isolated and alone is to the degree that we can be controlled and manipulated. Which I think is really, really important. If you think to those days when you were a child and you might have had a really intimidating teacher, or there might have been a really intimidating person on the playground, if you had a group of friends around you, you could say anything to those scary, scary people. And I think that's an analogy for me about why social connection is so important, is because that's where we derive our political power. And when we look at all of the changes society needs to make right now, when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we think about ageism, when we think about the challenges that people are faced with as they age and the systems that aren't necessarily adequate to address all of that, we need to have socially connected communities so that we can work together to solve problems. We're a society that has solved any number of problems, from building interstate highway systems to putting people into outer space. There's nothing that we can't do when we can work together. And when we are socially connected as communities, this is the thing that helps us solve the problems that we're presented with.
Does this work? Oh, good. As was mentioned in the introduction, I work with, doing a lot of work around issues related to people who I call and others call solo older adults. And the definition that we have been using in Minnesota for solo is what the groups all have in common is that they lack the traditional support structure that family provides. So solos can be in a lot of different, are solo for a lot of different reasons. They might have kids that live at a distance, they might have no children, they might have children that are not capable of providing support. So there's a whole range of reasons why people might be solo. And in my research so far, the number of people who are in this category is increasing, and my estimation right now is that at least 30% of people who are older adults, and younger ones can be solo too, but at least 30% of our older adult population really does not have that traditional safety net of family. So when I talk with solos, one of the things that I hear them say is that I'm really concerned about who is going to be there for me as I age. Who's going to be my healthcare agent? Who's going to help me clean out my house, after I'm gone? All those kinds of things. And what I find is that they're really kind of hungry to connect with people who are like them. So one of the things that I've worked on for about the past 5 or 6 years, I put together a model and some tools. And the model I call the backup plan, but it's a model for helping organizations put together peer support groups. And there's a lot of research that shows that people are a lot more successful at solving problems and getting results for themselves if they do that in concert with other people. So we in the Twin Cities areas, there's about 6 of these groups right now. There's one that just got started up in Park Rapids. There's one in St. Cloud, and I do work with organizations who want to start these groups and provide the materials to them free. So I periodically drop in on 1 or 2 of the groups, and earlier this year I stepped into a group when there was a new person there that had not been there before. And what she said to the group was, oh, I have all these friends. I could never talk to them about my situation and how worried I am about things. And she said, this is the first place where I feel I can really share my feelings, where I really feel at home. So to me, that's a good example of joy in community.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. As I thought about this joy in community, I had to think about what community, and I have many communities that I function in. The first one is my family, my son and I. I was a divorced single mom, raising a male child, and we left Minnesota and went to California. So we were really on our own. And I always thought that I provided my son with lots of wonderful and joyous events in our life. And as he got older, and now as an adult, I'll raise something, and he'll say, I don't remember that. And I thought, how could you forget? When we went to Mexico City, and we went to a police station and couldn't find it, and we said Jimmy Carter, and they said Habitat for Humanity. Now, so adventures like that, and he said, Mom, you have to keep telling me the stories in order for me to remember them. And it made me think about the work I did in North Minneapolis. I was the director of a nonprofit there for 10 years, and we were trying to do some branding. And when I had been gone to California and Mississippi and came back after 10 years, and I'm in North Minneapolis, and I go into community meetings, and every time people would get up in the community and they'd say, we have the worst case of syphilis and gonorrhea, or we have the highest rate of diabetes. People knew all these bad statistics. And I thought, oh, this is not a way to lift up our community. So we came up with a branding name, Karamu, which is a Swahili word, and it means a joyous place to gather. And we created banners on the streets, and we used that in everything that we presented about the community. And part of Karamu, a joyous place to gather, was that many things had happened on Plymouth Avenue in that community. There were good things that happened. There were bad things that were happening, but they were all part of the history, and people had a link to them. And by constantly, as my son said, retalking the history so it wasn't forgotten, we were able to reach that understanding and acknowledgement that it was a joyous place to gather, that it was the heart of the community and the center of life, and it provided a connectedness. Now, I've left that nonprofit, and the slogan has kind of gotten lost. But recently, I went to a funeral of a community elder, and it made me realize how funerals, at least in African American culture, are another joyous place. Yes, it is a sad time, but it's a time when we reflect on the history, the joy, the connections that we had with those individuals who are passing on. And so that's another piece of joy in my community. And the final one is I live out in the western suburbs. I often refer to it as the western frontier. In the town called Mound, we're on the west end of Lake Minnetonka. And I'm on the city council there. And while my family's lived there since 1966, I never really thought of it as my community. It's sort of like I live there, you know. I work someplace else, I do other things there. But now I'm on the city council. And so, you know, rethinking and looking at what's going on in our community. And in that community, what I found is joy is created when people in that community come together and volunteer and do their greatest efforts to make it a family-friendly community. And most recently, if you've seen the news stories, we just had the most wonderful play area. It's intergenerational, it's ADA accessible, play space done in our park. So now we have a park where a family can come and you can swim on the beach of Lake Minnetonka. You have a play area for your kids, or you can picnic and barbecue. And it has become that joyous place of joy for our community. And it was the money raised to build that playground was by the individuals of the community who came together after a tragedy of a young child being killed. But in that tragedy came joy that we can all celebrate, and we can come out of our houses of isolation for the last 4 years. Because I do feel like I've been isolated for 4 years as we move forward. So I think those are the things that I think about joy, that it comes in different groupings, whether it's your cultural group, your neighborhood group, your municipal, your family. All those things bring joy when you can come together, share all those histories and relationships that bind you and make you move forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are some really great examples, and I think sometimes we find joy in the most unexpected of places. And so looking for where that might be is always a good idea. My next question is kind of, how do you guys see social isolation affecting individuals, communities, and society as a whole? I think that's a big question. And so Linda, do you want to kick us off? And then actually, I'll just see if you two can share your mics for logistic reasons.
Okay. When I saw this question, one of the things that jumped out at me was a book that I read many years ago, which some of you may have read, called Bowling Alone, by Robert Putnam, who's a Harvard professor. And one of the ideas that he presented in the book was kind of interesting. He says there's two kinds of trust, and he talked about thick trust and thin trust. And thick trust is kind of what we think about, those deep relationships that we have with people, and the relationships are often very transactional. Okay, I'll help you, you help me. And that's really wonderful if we have those relationships. But then he said there's another kind of trust, which is called thin trust. And thin trust is kind of like what's happening in this room. It's our relationships in connections with looser groups of people. And you may have many of those thin trust examples. You know, people you work out with at the Y, or your book club or whatever. And from his point of view, he said that these thin trust relationships are almost even more important, but they're equally important as those thick trust relationships, because you're developing a wider pool of connections. And so you actually are building a broader set of resources. And our keynote speaker talked a little bit about the importance of that. So I think that that's very valuable. So one thing I was focusing on when I started working on the idea of doing the solos groups was the fact that it doesn't matter whether you read about a list of opportunities in the paper or a book. Sometimes just walking into a new group is really hard. And developing those relationships, there's some skill involved and some fear. I mean, there's a whole bunch of sort of the invisible things that we don't think of very much. So I think a lot of times some of the people who are most at risk for loneliness and isolation are the folks who really lack those interpersonal skills or have really difficulty building those relationships. The extreme introverts among us, or non-extreme introverts, but people who are just habitual go hide in the corner kind of people. So those are the folks that I worry about the most, and that's why one of the things I have worked on is trying to find ways to just bring those people together and let each other know, oh yeah, we're all in the same boat. We all don't know how to do this, and this is all scary for all of us.
Will you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, how have you seen social isolation affect individuals, communities, and society?
Yeah, we see the effects of social isolation all the time. I mean, as Dr. VanAhn had pointed out, there's all sorts of research that talks about how our health is degraded when we don't have the social connections we need for wellness. And when I think about this issue, I think it's really important that we've all been kind of trained to think about, to be healthy and well, we need to think about what our diet looks like, and we need to think about what our exercise regime is going to be, and we all need to be really focused on that. And I feel like what we need to add to that is, what is our social engagement strategy? So what we see in community is people kind of follow a path. If you're living a traditional family life, you might have a big network of friends and family, or friends that you make when your children are off doing their sporting events. It's the soccer parents, or the lacrosse parents in my case, that we become really, really good friends with. But as our kids graduate high school and leave those sports, that whole network of friends kind of starts to evaporate. You might hold on to one or two, but that network kind of deteriorates. And then there's another stage in life when we get to retirement. If you have a traditional job, you've got a lot of your social connections in the workplace. And just like was mentioned here a minute ago, we've got these thin connections, those relationships we have at the water cooler when somebody's asking you about your day or asking you about the vacation you took. These might not be your best friends, but it's an important part of your social network that helps you feel like you really matter in the world, that you have a place in this world. But as we go in and retire, we step away from a whole cadre of human beings that would normally be part of our life experience, and then continue that down the continuum. As we continue to age, our family members move away or they pass away, our friends do the same thing, and slowly but surely our social network is deteriorating just from kind of natural causes. Add to that, you might have a rough personality. You might be pushing people away from you a little bit. And so if we think about how important it is to have these social connections, what we really want to do is say, this is something that I've got to spend time and energy on. Just like I'm going to think about what I'm going to put into the grocery cart. Just like I'm going to think about how I'm going to exert myself physically so that I can stay physically healthy. I need to, and all of us in this room need to think about, where am I expanding my social network? How am I taking the time, energy? How am I taking the personal risk of putting myself out there so that I'm forming new relationships that can be there for me as other relationships are going to fade away? I think that's just, if we could walk away with one thing from this experience that we're sharing here together, is let's all make sure that we have plans. Let's make sure that we also have those plans include people from every generation. One of the other pressures that I see in society is that we're kind of pushed into age groups. You see that with housing, especially with housing for older adults. There's no reason that we should only be spending time with people our own age. To the degree that we can build these relationships with people from all generations, not only enriches our lives, but that's the value that older adults have to the rest of society, is our life experiences, when shared with others, helps enrich our communities.
This was a difficult one for me a little bit. I had to think a little hard about this. And I think that what happens is, in my own situation, I was extremely active. I was going all the time. I had friends, I had networks. And when COVID hit and we were going to be at home, I thought, oh, this is interesting. And at the same time that this happened, I also had a vision challenge. And so I would say people who don't have a plan as they're aging for different changes in our life, that this isolation can take you by surprise because you don't have the plan for how to move forward. So it took me a little bit of time to figure out that I could use Metro Mobility to get around, because suddenly I could not drive anymore. At first I couldn't drive at night, then I couldn't drive in daytime. And so I couldn't drive, but I live 28 miles from Minneapolis, and everything I do is in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So making those adjustments as you're being isolated, or knowing how to access the things that can help you make those adjustments is really important, because it can sort of double up on you. You can become immobile and isolated because you're stuck without the resources to help you maintain your connectivity with the rest of the world. So I think that I may just end with that. That's enough of a sad story, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. No, but I really appreciate you bringing that up, because as our keynote mentioned, the health consequences can lead to social isolation, and social isolation can lead to health consequences, right? So I think that's a really good illustration of that. So loneliness among older adults is a highly complex issue. I think we can all agree to that. How do you address the intersectionality in the work that each of you does with factors such as socioeconomic status, health conditions, and geographic location? How has that come into your guys' work? And Sherry, if you want to start.
Sounds like my life. It's interesting. I ended up retiring 10 years before I planned to retire. So that was an interesting economic shift suddenly. Although I had a little bit of a pre-retirement testing period, because at 60 I decided to go back and get my master's at the Humphrey School. So to do that, I decided that I had paid cash when I went to undergrad school. And I thought, well, I'll live on loans and I'll go to school and I won't work and I'll just focus on school. And so I did that. And to do that, I got rid of my car, I rode the bus, I rented out a room in my house. I did all these things to deal with this new limited income I was going to be on. So that got me ready for the economic shift. But then there were the other components of this, and that is, I have to look at my notes here, the health status. My health status changed. And that was an awakening, because when I got out of graduate school, I had a job that I was doing really well at. I got laid off, and suddenly I didn't have health insurance. Talk about the biggest shock in my system. I went to my general practitioner, and I cried in her office and said, I've never not had health insurance. What does that mean? What am I going to do? Well, luckily, we live in Minnesota, and we have Minnesota Care. So I did get Minnesota Care and, got through that hump. But, first I was, income, loss of driving, health insurance. So you get all of these things happening to you. And then, of course, I live in this geography issue where I live way outside of where I go and do all of my activities. And trying to piece all those things together and stay connected is important. Now, I have to admit, I have a group of friends who are so dear to me. They call me to see how I'm doing. They come out to see me. And they're always pushing me about, well, have you done this, have you done that, to get to the next connection. But I think that it is hard as you age to keep up with all the things that you need to know to help keep you involved and engaged and active in your community, that you're constantly challenged with what's going on. And one of the things I recently spoke about is dealing with that I have two things that now qualify me to consider myself as disabled. But you know what? When I ask people, what does that mean? How do I access it? There's no pathway for me as a senior who aged into a disability as it is for if I was a child born with a disability. And so, you have those challenges, which can again isolate you and make you go into those areas of depression and further isolation. One thing I've learned is I share everything I know, because with my health situation, people who didn't even know me observed me and said, oh, do you have, well, at the time I thought I had essential tremors. And so people said, do you have an essential tremor? And I said, well, I think I might. And they would tell me about what they did. Now, some of it was good advice, some people say it's kind of wacky. I mean, I tried frankincense oil. I tried, I tried diet stuff. I found out about a procedure called focus ultrasound. And, but people were willing to say to me, this is my experience and this is what I've had. And that's part of the isolation thing that we have to be careful about. We have to understand that not everything everyone tells you is going to be the solution for you. But there's no harm in sharing and letting a person find out if that's for them. And so often we don't want to share. So recently, in the last 10 years, I've been dealing with Parkinson's. And so I just had a procedure, deep brain stimulation. And I have a wonderful doctor here at the U. But I quickly decided I needed to call all the people I knew who I saw suffer with tremors and say, I'm not trying to get in your medical history. I just want you to know this is what I went through. Look it up. See if it's something that can help you. So part of isolation is us being able to give and share our own stories with others that it might help them.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Linda.
The first observation that I want to make related to this question is there are no simple issues anymore. There are really no simple people anymore, because I think everyone has lots of things intersecting in their life. So this is sort of where we are, and yet there's a lot of information out there that seems to imply that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. You can find books that tell you how to do this and do this first and whatever. And I think that's kind of leading people down a path that is not going to get them where they need to be. So in my work with solos and the model that I worked on, really try to help people not just think about what, but kind of the why and the how, and it's more of a thinking, and to be result oriented. What are we trying to accomplish? What's the situation, and what do we want to accomplish? And that there are many paths to that. So, part of the thing that the groups work on is developing a plan. How am I going to do this, and who is going to be my supports, and whatever. But really helping people understand that what works for one person will not necessarily work for the other, and that's perfectly fine. And so I really try to steer away from telling people what to do and helping them sort of think through kind of, again, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the results we're trying to get? Some people might find it desirable to put their will in electronic form. Other people might want it in paper form, and it doesn't matter as long as we accomplish the result and get it to places where the right people need to get it. So that's my concern about as we go forward and we're trying to help people stay in charge of the driver's seat of their own life, that we tap into their own abilities and talents, and again, help them get to results rather than trying to tell people what to do all the time.
Thanks, Linda. So when I think about intersectionality in social isolation, I think about how, and it's kind of similar to what Linda's just saying, that all of us have very different lived experiences. And as our organization over the last year has gone around the state in doing what we called community conversations, holding listening sessions with older adults throughout the state of Minnesota, looking for people from as many different demographic groups as we could, we find that there's so much that we share and so much that's really different. When we think about the risk factors for social isolation, I was explaining a minute ago how all of us are kind of having a shared experience in life that can lead us to being isolated. But then it's also really important as an organization like Friends & Co. that's working to help others address their social isolation, to understand that these different experiences present differently. So if you're socially If you're socially outgoing, you're going to have probably an easier time of addressing or creating that strategy to stay socially engaged. But if you're an introvert, you're at a higher risk now of being isolated. But there's other groups that are at a higher risk too. And I think Dr. VanAhn was talking about that in her slide presentation, that if you're from a group that's underrepresented and has experienced prejudices, those prejudices kind of still come forward and make it even harder to stay socially or socially engaged. We work with LGBTQ plus community members and hear stories about people going back in the closet as they go into assisted living because they no longer feel safe. And when we understand that, the importance of understanding the different experiences other people have are really, really important for helping all of us together as a community see that bigger, more complete picture and work more diligently to kind of address what those individual root causes are. So I think that's what I find is really, really important about the intersectionality, is that all of us have an opportunity to continue on our journey to understand other human beings better so that we're in a better position to create community with each other.
I appreciate that from each one of you. So I think it's important to realize that oftentimes loneliness is viewed as a very personal experience, right? Very individualized experience. But the Surgeon General's report emphasizes the broader societal implications, right? How do we start to shift societal attitudes and norms to recognize and address loneliness as a public health issue that requires collective action and community-level interventions? James, do you want to kick us off?
Thanks, Christina. When the Surgeon General talks about, say that again though. Yeah.
So really, loneliness is viewed as a personal and individualized experience, but the Surgeon General's report emphasizes the importance of the broader societal impacts, right? And so how can we shift societal attitudes and norms to recognize and address loneliness as a public health issue?
Thank you. So what comes to mind for me is that we live in a society that really values our fierce independence and individualism. There's a lot of talk about being an individual and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, and you hear people bragging about their grandparent who still lives on the family farm out in the cornfield all by themselves in their late 90s, and they'll brag about that independence and forget the fact that social isolation or solitary confinement is considered a form of torture by the United Nations. And when we push ourselves to live this independent life, it's a fallacy, because as human beings we are interdependent. We need social engagement, and as has been mentioned before, not everybody needs the same amount of social engagement, but we all need to be connected to other human beings, and we all need to matter. Just an anecdotal story, my father-in-law is a retired rural mail carrier, and so this farm family member story really resonates with me, because he had it set up where he's delivering mail out to farmhouses, and there was a number of people on his route who he had an agreement. They needed to make sure that their drapes were opened in the morning, so when he delivered the mail, he knew everything was okay. So if the drapes were closed, he knew to get out of his mail car and go and check on that person. And that's because he was the only person that would even know. Probably for weeks. Some of these people have family members within the county that don't live that far, but these are farming families who have people working 18 hours a day. They love their mother, they love their grandmother, but they don't necessarily have time and energy to connect with them. And so I don't know how to wrap this up. It's just that it affects people so differently, and when we think about that fallacy of our fierce independence, I think we have to push back on that and remind ourselves that our mutual dependency, mattering to other people, is critically important.
I would agree with you that, that fierce independence, and sometimes I think our families, our closest family members, are the most guilty of that. I have several friends, one which I talked to her last night, and okay. And in the conversation, her isolation is that she has 2 grandchildren. The second one she had never met, because her son would never bring the child over for her to see the child. And she's you know, her children are adults, she lives alone, and she's isolated. And so she tries to fill that void, but that absence of contact with her own grandchildren. And her son seems to think that she's okay. She makes good money, she's living well, she's independent, but, you know, not realizing the emotional needs that she has in sustaining herself. So I think that we have to first sometimes look at our immediate family members when that happens. In my family, we have family reunions every 2 years, but they stopped when the oldest of our aunts, who died at 99, when her son wouldn't let her come to the family reunion. And we were going to bring the family reunion to her, but he said no, he still wouldn't let her come because of COVID. And so he isolated her. And so for the last 5 years of her life, only a few of us got to see her, you know, upon his letting us come in the home. And when she died, she was 99 years old. You know, there aren't too many friends left at 99. Now, the beauty of her celebration was that she had taught school in a small town in Louisiana called Zwolle, and the 5th graders that she taught, 20 of them came to her service to celebrate her. But, you know, those were people that had wanted to see her, but again, the isolation of a caregiver. So, you know, I don't mean to talk bad about caregivers, because I have a lot of passion for caregivers, but I also know that caregivers can lead and contribute to the isolation of individuals.
Yeah. If I'd like to just point out a resource that relates to this question. If some of you are not familiar with the Frameworks Institute, it's an organization that is doing a lot of work on looking at various kinds of issues and pointing out that the way that we frame the discussion makes a huge impact on how we think about and approach the discussion. And so the framing of isolation or loneliness or whatever, it really makes a huge difference. And if we want people to focus more on how loneliness and isolation are created by systems, then we need to start telling stories about that. And a lot of the stories that we tell about people in isolation are really focusing on them as individuals and what they do. And they don't often enough mention the role that systems play, meaning all the policies, the practices, the rules, everything that's out there that really shape how something impacts on somebody. And you cannot solve systems problems as an individual. You can only solve those problems by collective action and collaboration. One of the classic examples that I run into with solos is people who are going to have some kind of procedure or, you know, some treatment, like going for your colonoscopy, where the medical provider says, you must have somebody to drive you over there, and if you're having your cataract surgery, you must have somebody to stay with you 24 hours a day. Well, probably if you have a close-knit family group, that's not an issue. But if you are somebody who maybe lives in an outer suburb or some other place, there may not actually be public transportation that would get you where you want to go. You may not have a friend or a colleague who has the time off to take you there. And so the people postponing or just delaying, just ignoring treatments that they might need to have, often make them because the systems are not there to support them. The policies and the practices of that medical providers are actually creating barriers for people. And so that's why it's good to help if you're talking about somebody with a story about somebody with a transportation issue, to frame it in terms of why is this happening? Not just this is this person's situation, but why is this person in this situation, and what kinds of collective action would help us resolve that situation and make it better for the person.
Thank you for that. And I just want to note that we do have a breakout session on reframing aging, and so some of that kind of reframing and frameworks work will be a part of that conversation today. So I'm going to jump to our last question here before we open up for kind of Q&A. So panelists, I'm really curious, what are some of the practical strategies that our attendees here today can bring back to their communities to implement to create inclusive spaces where lonely or isolated individuals of any age can really feel connected?
Thanks, Christina. For me, this one's really easy. I need all of you to do, when this presentation is over, I need you to all stand up, walk into this room behind you, go to the Friends & Co table and sign up to be a volunteer. We right now have over 80 older adults looking for companionship, either telephone companions or visiting companions. This is the work of Friends & Co, is to train and vet volunteers to spend time with older adults who are experiencing social isolation. And what we find is our volunteers have almost like a religious experience. They get glassy-eyed and they say, oh my goodness, I get so much more out of this relationship than I ever thought. I thought I was going to go and do some good and help somebody else, but by golly, this helps me so much. And that's the antidote to social isolation, is to get out there and volunteer and put yourself in the community and do some good. It can be through Friends & Co, of course, but there's literally thousands of organizations here in Minnesota that rely on volunteerism to make our society a better place. And so, of course, I'm a proponent to have you step over to the Friends & Co table, but please just know that that's a wonderful, wonderful strategy, is to put yourself out there and find a way to make a difference in somebody else's life, and you'll find that it makes a big difference in your life as well.
Well, I too would agree that volunteering, making that effort to expand your personal network by just one, if everyone here said, I'm going to increase my contacts by one, and develop that relationship and learn about someone else and become their friend or their contact, makes a difference.
I once read an article that was kind of interesting that talked about 3 of the best ways to create community. One of the big ones was some kind of group food situation, like you're sitting around here eating together. The second one was some kind of action-oriented, project-oriented thing, such as what James has talked about, volunteering or whatever. The third one was kind of interesting to me. It was group singing. So maybe we ought to all just sort of rise up and sing something now. When I looked at this, considered this question before I came here, I thought, aha, we're at the University of Minnesota, so maybe it would be good to offer a challenge to the university. I'd like to see the university to create a course that would include people from high school, college level, working people, retired people, and the course would would identify a problem and have that group work over a period of time to solve that problem. And it brings, you know, the intergenerational connections together. But also, if you think about it, you know, people of the current Gen Z generation have lived in a world where they only know about cell phones and things, and so they're used to pushing buttons to solve problems. And to me, what's kind of been left out of the equation is we're not involving people enough in process. And process, the digging, the brainstorming, the just exploring, bumping into problems, that's what builds relationships and also builds good solutions. And so it would be a strategy that might help in a number of levels to build community, but also to get people more focused on how they can be empowered to actually solve a real problem.
Well, thank you so much for that. Actually, I think we're ready to transition to the Q&A if we have the microphone out. They're ready? Yeah, okay. So anybody have questions? It looks like we have one up here in the front. We'll bring the microphone from over there. And anybody else, as you're thinking, get ready.
This is probably not a question, but it's an observation. I look around and we're an awfully Caucasian group of people. Miss Sherry, you're probably the only one of a different skill, or one of the few. And you look around the state of Minnesota, we probably have the largest Somali population outside of Somalia. We have a large Russian population. We have so many diverse populations. I guess, what can we do?
Yeah, so for anybody who didn't quite hear that, it's kind of, the question is around the fact that we have a lot of really diverse communities here in Minnesota, and if we look around this room, you know, a lot of us kind of look very similar. And so how can we open the doors to diverse communities, or how can diverse communities work on creating connection as well?
Well, Age Friendly Minnesota, we have really worked hard at reaching that diversity, both not only cultural diversity, but greater Minnesota versus urban and suburban Minnesota. It takes a lot of work, and you have to be very intentional, and everything. And also, sometimes it's the way in which different cultures relate to aging. There is a good friend of mine, she just retired from the university, and she did a lot of work in aging in the Black community. But when you read her papers, she talks about kinship. And that's the link that she uses for the African American community, is kinship. And I know that in talking with different cultural groups, I once met a young woman who said, you know, my parents' age, I became their caregiver, but I was a child who was raised in the United States, so she never saw caregiving in the cultural context of her family's original country. And so she realized that she was missing some components to how to care for her aging parents, because she hadn't been exposed to the cultural traditions, methodologies, celebrations, and acknowledgments. So, you know, it's also about us also breaking through those cultural boundaries. And sometimes it's just information not getting out to people. There's still a lot of selective stuff. I mean, I realized in my own health journey, I was always pushing and asking questions and saying, I want to do this. And then they'd sort of say, well, maybe you don't want to do that. And they'd give me alternatives. But if you don't have that, that knowledge to raise those questions, then it doesn't get spread. So when I asked my doctor, why aren't more people here in neurology like me? And he said, well, they're not getting referred. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. I'll start referring people. You know, and then he said, and maybe, do they have insurance? Now, I had a doctor who I think assumed I didn't have the right insurance to get my cornea transplant, but I did. But because I got mad at him and left him, I got my cornea transplant. So in reaching out to the different cultural groups and getting more diversity, you have to work at it all the time. You can't be a one-time effort. Every time you do something, you've got to constantly be reaching out and keeping those groups engaged. too in the process. So just having them sit at the tables and be here isn't enough. We have to have them actually engaged.
Linda or James, do you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Christina. There's not a lot to add to that. I think if we look at our society, you know, I think we all have to come to realize, or most of us probably have come to realize that we've all been raised in a very racist culture. Not necessarily overt racism, although that does occur, but we're just raised in a society, and you could ask yourself, who did you invite here today that looks different than the rest of the crowd? I think if we start to take personal responsibility for forging and building relationships, that's the step. But it's hard work. It's really, really hard work. We have to be present in the communities of people. Like in the case of Friendsico, we need to be present in the communities of the people we intend to serve, and that's not a light switch that gets flipped. That's not showing up once and coming in with some big solution that we want to pitch to a group of people. It's really being present, and there's just no shortcuts for that, and I think that's our challenge. That all of us, I would imagine, in this room have every intention in the world to do much, much better at this, but it is so much work, and it takes such discipline. It has to become a practice in our lives that we exercise on a very regular basis. But I love this question because, you know, we're talking about social isolation, and guess what we're isolated from in this room? You know, people from a bunch of different life experiences that are different from our own, and maybe that's cultural isolationism instead of social isolationism, but it's a wonderful, wonderful point. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. I think we might have time for one more question.
Would it be possible to get like email contact information for the different panelists?
That question is easy. Yes, we can provide that out. Yes. How about one more very quick question?
Much appreciation for the mention of reframing, and in that vein, I am wondering so much who and where is there mention of what is most valued in the elderly. We know every other age what we value most. Where are people thinking mainly in terms of what elderly have that others don't? Like the wisdom for in particular. I've heard very much about, you know, when I've heard so much today about what the elderly need in terms of for themselves. And I'm hearing it come from the lens that's most common in our society today. Since there's so much problem with exclusion, everyone focuses on that to a huge extent, which is perfectly proper. And I'm thinking personally, I would not want a hyper focus on one thing to miss something equally important, the extreme value of seniors.
Yeah, so I appreciate that very much, and I think just for the sake of time, let's just give each panelist a quick opportunity to kind of speak about the positive things that older adults can bring to a community setting.
My question, if I may please, is does anyone know of an organization, an author, anything that's helping to remind people of the values of seniors?
Sure.
Well, in the interest of continuing my shameless self-promotion or the promotion of my organization, we definitely always welcome people to consider engaging with older adults through our organization, Friends & Co., where there's a table where you can get information.
Just a quick response. I think this goes back to we have to be much more deliberate about presenting the opportunities for people to see the value, to talk about the value. You know, we still have those funny birthday cards about the creaky old people that, you know, are out there from Hallmark. And, you know, there's lots of ways those negative stereotypes are being reinforced. So I think it's upon all of us to tune into some of those things that are being said and try to take personal responsibility for helping to change the dialogue.
Yeah, and Sherry, one quick last word.
So currently, there is a legislative task force on aging, which is looking at the potential creation of an agency or a cabinet position on aging in the state. That is the opportunity potentially at the larger level of the state, acknowledging and bringing forth the values and contributions of those of us who are aging in Minnesota to our state. So that's one opportunity. And then, remember, we have, throughout the state, we have lots of community centers, senior centers, aging organizations. They're individual organizations, but they are lifting up the talents and the abilities and creating community for the aging population in their various areas. And so let's not forget that work is always going on.
Very good. Thank you all. I really appreciate the time today and the conversation.
If you just want to stay seated for just a couple of minutes. So thank you to Christina and Sherry and Linda and James for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and your stories to help us really shape our thoughts for today's activities. And I'm sure we could have much more conversation, and that's the purpose of today. So the rest of the day is in your hands. For the next half hour, you're going to have time to visit the booths. The booths are located in both the Johnson room as well as the Sky-U-Ma room right behind you. You'll find activities, information about programs and services here at the university and with our community partners. The booths are also going to be available for an hour over lunch, so you'll be able to have your lunch and peruse those booths. You're also going to find the alumni market in the room, and you can see up there an open sign. Everyone see the red open sign? The alumni market is open on the second floor. The market is actually made up of alumni who have gone on to create businesses that sell products, including ceramics, clothing, food, you name it. So you can peruse items at the booth, you can go up to the market, and we have a special invitation for you. We all get 15% off at the market today. So if you go up, just make sure you got your name badge, and you can walk away with all kinds of Gopher memorabilia, including you, Dr. VanAhn. We will accept you as an honorary Gopher. We don't use the W word in this building, but we do welcome you. So following your break at 11 o'clock, your first breakout sessions are going to be available. For most of you, you will find the breakout sessions that you selected on your name badge. And we purposefully put you in those rooms just to make sure that we had a good mix of people, right? So we didn't overload a room. If you find that your room is full, you can pick another section. Remember, our breakout sessions are repeated in the afternoon. They're the exact same ones. So you'll be able to go to 2 different topics. At 12 o'clock, we're going to have lunch in here from our wonderful friends at D'Amico. We are going to have some special guests. So for those of you who've been here 3 years, the first year we had Goldie, right? Goldie ran around and gave everyone hugs. We were trying to figure out how can we top Goldie. So last year we had the brass quintet. Everyone remember that? They were playing songs here. Well, how do you top the brass quintet? Puppies. So we are going to have the University of Minnesota Paws program, which is a program here that brings comfort animals during times of stress for our students. So we're going to have the animals here over lunch, and you're free to play during that time. So, and then right after lunch at 1 o'clock, you're going to have your second breakout session. And at 2 o'clock, our time together today will close. The alumni market will be open until 4 today, so you can go back up at the end of the day as well. And we hope that this won't be your last time on campus. If you have any questions today, find people with the little red flag that says Ask Me or the black council member on their badge, and they can help you answer any questions. We also want to hear from you, so you're going to receive a survey after this event. We're already thinking about the 4th annual Age-Friendly University Day next June, and we want to make sure that we bring topics and sessions to you that are of interest and value. So in that survey, please let us know your thoughts. So again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a great day. We have a wonderful thank you gift for our speakers. It is a gift certificate to the Alumni Market, where you get 15% off today. So I hope you have a great day, and go Gophers. Here you go, James.
So welcome. My name is Kate Schaefers, and I'm director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and I am thrilled to introduce our speaker today for this session on disrupt aging in your community. Jay Hapola is Associate State Director, Community Engagement with AARP Minnesota, serving older Minnesotans and those who will be older someday. He leads volunteers, education programs, and community development initiatives, and works with his team on legislative advocacy campaigns. All of these efforts are designed as partnerships with individuals and organizations to achieve a more equitable and greater good. He served on a number of nonprofit boards in aging services, volunteer program administration, and now environmental conservation, which was an early interest when he earned his bachelor's degree in recreation, parks, and leisure services from Minnesota State University, Mankato. Thank you so much, Jay, for being here.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kate. Turns out I'm wired up and I'm mic'd up so I can hear myself and you can hear me too. I was reflecting this morning about my past. Before coming to AARP about 10 years ago, I worked at Minnesota Children's Museum where I ran the volunteer program, and so most people, when they think about that, assume that I was working with very young children, early childhood development. That's the mission of that organization. But instead, in fact, I worked with a lot of college students. We ran a big internship program and had many, many gophers as a part of our program there. But when I made the shift over to AARP, what I'm fond of saying is now I'm working with the big kids instead of the high school students and the young children and the college students. And it's been a great blessing. I was talking with Arnie earlier this morning about coming to AARP and just having the opportunity to learn not just about aging issues that will be a part of my future and everyone else's, but to learn from our very wise volunteers, to learn from older people. So it just is always astounding to me what I learned from the wisdom of our volunteers and the people that we work with. People like Bill Raker, who's with me here today and will be part of the conversation. And we're talking about disrupt aging. Our CEO, her name's Joanne Jenkins, and she wrote a book called Disrupt Aging. And so really the framework for this whole conversation we'll be having today is about challenging outdated beliefs about age and sparking new solutions. So there are different frameworks. We heard a number of them this morning, but that's ours from our CEO, Joanne Jenkins, challenging outdated beliefs and sparking new solutions. We're going to start with a game. Does that sound good? All right. And this is the advanced version of guess this person's age and whether they are age 50 or older or 49 and under. So here we go. Is Ava Mendez 50 and over or 49 or younger? I guess raise your hand if you think she's 50 or over. And now you got to raise your hand if you think she's 49 or under. Okay, so the majority think 50 or older. She's exactly age 50 right now. Up next, we got Eminem. 50 plus or under 50? Raise your hand for 50 plus. Less than half thinking 50 plus. The other half of you, or the other group, think under 50. Bill included. Age 51, he's just a little bit older. Like I told you, it's the advanced version. I don't have Clint Eastwood on these slides. Rashida Jones. Raise your hand for 50 and older. Okay, that's about half. And now raise your hand if you think she's under 50. Okay, she's 48. Shaq, what do we think? 50 and over, raise your hand. That's more than half. Under 50, get your hands out of your pockets if you think he's under 50. Just a few thinking under 50. 52, very good. We have at least one more, maybe two. By the way, these are all my generation of people. I'm 46. I was asking my wife how old I am the other day, and I insisted I was 45, but no, I'm 46. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe I'm 45. I was born in 1978, but in November, so someone else can do the math on that. Does anyone recognize Alyson VanAhn? She was in those American Pie movies, I think, were the names of them. Among other things, she's been on TV shows. Raise your hand for over 50. Just a few, so everyone else, if you think she's under 50, okay, most of you, exactly age 50, right now. These are my Gen Xers. And I think this is the last one for now. Raise your hand for over 50. Most, okay. Under 50? He's only 49. I think it's September of this year he will turn 50. So part of my point here, now AARP membership is 50, so define that however you like. And these might be the people you see on the cover of the magazine in the near future because they're turning over age 50. And my point is, I think it all sparks something for us when we think of celebrities or athletes and these people that we admire to some degree and their age. I think you would consider a lot of these people as the embodiment of youth in a lot of ways, but here they are turning age 50. And with that, we're going to start the conversation about age, and I want to turn it over to Bill Raker. He's a volunteer with AARP. He's a member of our Fraud Fighters volunteer team. If you read the bio in the agenda about me, it talks about how we do a lot of fraud prevention education, and that's true, but we run a lot of different programs just the same. And Bill has a question for you.
Thank you, Jay, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. I've been volunteering with AARP since 2018 after I retired. But I want to share a little personal story with you, and I want you to pay attention to the context and the point or the message of the story. Think about the last time, the most recent time, that you had a conversation with someone in your family where the subject of age came up. So here's my personal story. Last Thursday, my wife and I are getting ready to go to a retirement party for one of our friends. And just kind of out of the blue, she says, "Dear, you know, we're like the Stonehenge." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, we're old. We've aged well, we're still standing, and we never go anywhere." Now, what my wife was trying to tell me is that we're not traveling as much as she would like to travel. But normally, she's much more direct, and she would say, "Bill, you never take me anywhere." So the point of that little story is that when the subject of age comes up, it's really critical to be aware of and to understand the context and really what the conversation is about. And that's why I share that little story with you this morning about age.
And who else has one? Kate, do you have the microphone? Who else? The last time you talked about age with your family or friends, what was that like? And introduce yourself and tell people where you're from.
I'm Debbie Reisinger from St. Paul. My daughter informed me this year she was turning 50, and I was sure that had to be some kind of mistake because I couldn't have a daughter who was 50. But I did go out to California, and she and some friends had a May the 4th Be With You party, and I dressed up as the, in a New Age costume, something of the North Galaxy. So we had fun, but it's still hard to believe I have a daughter who's 50.
Yeah. May the 4th be with you.
My name is Jennifer Verbrugge. I'm with Shoreview Parks and Recreation. I brought a group here today, and this weekend my mother turned 84, and she's had some health issues this year, first time ever, And I've been going to all the appointments, and we talked about how aggravating it is that everybody qualifies her condition with her age. Your heart is in good shape for your age. You're walking really well for your age, not who she was and who she is and what she is able to do. That shouldn't be for her age. It's who she is. And it blossomed into a larger conversation about ability and ageism. So anyway.
Yeah, you're digging into it. I sort of skipped over the agenda here, but if we don't run out of time, part of the conversation is about approaching people as individuals. Everyone's different at age 85 or a different age, and even the healthcare professionals are talking about being good for your age in a different way. How about one more? When's the last time you talked about age in your family, and what was that like?
Hi, I'm Jean Lee. It's not the last time, but it's a memorable time. I remember when my children were in elementary, and they get asked how old I am, and my little daughter, who was about 6 at the time, not understanding the concept of age, she said, "Oh, my mom's 100." So I said, now that I'm closer to that age, I really, it would really be great to live past that. But on the other side, I wanted to tell you something that was very nice. Metro Mobility gave me a card, and they said that it doesn't expire till I'm 250 years old, so I give them credit for that.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I like it. Let's do one more, because it's my friend Arnie up here who raised his hand, please. Arnie's done a ton of service with the city of Edina and elsewhere.
Thank you. Really good to be here today. So I grew up here in Minneapolis. I lived in and worked in Rochester, Minnesota for 32 years at Mayo Clinic and knew a lot about medicine, even though I was an administrator. Retired about 20 years ago. About 2 years ago, I had a diagnosis of being in early stages of memory loss, and about a month ago, the diagnosis that it is Alzheimer's. Fortunately, I've been active in AARP. I've got all this great history of my medical information from Mayo Clinic, and now the University of Minnesota, where I currently get my care. And one of the things that I've done is I've been very public about the diagnosis. I can do that because I'm 80. If I were still in working years, it would be a death knell for people who would have to worry about their profession. But this is a privilege for me to be public about it, let people know, tell them that there may be times when I look at them and don't recognize them or forget things, and please would they help me. I'm still active in the League of Women Voters and other organizations. I was on Human Rights and Relations Commission in Edina, and I don't like to give up that kind of activity, but it's going to be different than it used to be. So it's not the end to have this diagnosis, and you've got a lot of people around, and AARP and other organizations are just a great resource for all of us. So this was not a paid political announcement. and this young man at the head of the room here is really a great resource for all of us. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Arnie, and it's good to see you today. And thanks, everyone, for sharing. These are the experiences that we share. And I think as we get to the bottom of it, again, I'll keep repeating, we have the opportunity to challenge outdated beliefs about aging, and we have the opportunity to spark new solutions. So, as with any conversation about aging, I'll get through some of the demographics that we know about, but I want to get really to the value of the fact that people are living longer and generating activity and economics in our communities and in the United States of America. So, I mean, did you know that in the year 1900, a lot of us look forward, and we've been talking about 2030, and older people are going to outnumber the amount of kids that are in elementary school and in, K through 12 school. We know about that. Back in 1900, the average age was, life expectancy was 47. And if you look out to 2060, people are going to be living even longer. Couple that just with our population expansion and the percentage of people who are going to be over the age of 65 as a share of our population is going to continue to expand. My wife and I have had a number of conversations about our home ownership and what's going to happen once the baby boomers turn 65, 75, 85. You know now that the oldest baby boomers are turning 85. So what's going to happen? And I guess even with my level of education and working for AARP, what I didn't realize until just recently, that millennial generation is bigger than the baby boomers. So having an older population is not going to change anytime soon. Some of you, I try to limit myself to talking about the pandemic 3 times in a presentation, so this is number 1. During the pandemic, there is still, the jury's out on how that affected our life expectancy as a population. It decreased by some estimates by 1 year, again, as a big population. What it means to you and I as individuals is different than these kind of population dynamics, but we'll continue to see the increase in the share of people who are living longer as a part of our population. And there's value to that. And it's happening really across the country. If you look at the shaded areas on the map, what you see is the percent of the population that is 65 plus, and in the very fine print that I must apologize for, on the bottom side of that percentage of the population, the lightest color states are from 7 to 14%, people over the age of 65. And then up on the higher end, it's up to 18%. And this was 2010, as also you can see by the census. The red dots just show you how many people altogether are in the state. So I guess it's kind of obvious that people, in Florida, there's a lot of people there and also a lot of older people living in Florida. West Virginia, similarly. But anyone want to guess what the youngest state in the union is? Alaska. Utah. Did someone say Utah? I think it's about their religion of a lot of people who live in Utah and how many children that they tend to have. Also, Arizona and New Mexico are relatively young with new immigrants coming in. Texas, similarly, as you'll see on this next slide, which puts us out to next year, where these 2 maps, I didn't make them myself, and I laugh because it makes me think of the weather report. Even it's a sunny day outside and there's gonna be some red on the map somewhere, right? Depending on, no matter what the severity of the weather is. But anyway, so we're gonna get a lot older. On the top end of this map now, it goes up to 24% people over the age of 65, and that's where we're headed. And it's a good thing, It was actually Mark Twain that said this, that everyone wants to live forever, but no one wants to get old, and it's coming true. It was Al Franken who said, I don't understand who in the world thinks that getting older is cheap. It costs money to take care of ourselves for longer. So this is what I've been hinting at. It's really about the value that older people contribute to the economy. It was a University of Minnesota Extension Service sociologist who did this research and was really looking at the population decline in western Minnesota and these rural small towns. But if you go out to, I don't know, what's an example, Marshall or even smaller towns in western Minnesota, Ortonville is someplace I visit regularly. The population in those counties has declined by up to almost 40% in a lot of places. But if you go there, do you see a lot of vacant homes? I don't. When I visit, I get out there regularly. You don't see vacant homes in these places, so where did all the people go? It's that instead of a family of 5 or 6 or 7 of 8 living in these homes, it's single people like Linda and the panelists were talking about earlier today. So that's how the population dynamics are changing in these places. But certainly we challenge outdated beliefs about if you're trying to invest in the economy in a small town in western Minnesota, what you ought to have people do is move out of their homes and get out of the way so that young people can move in. That's not the right approach. These people need to live in their homes and communities where they want to be. By our research, we know people want to stay in their own homes and their communities. And where's the money come from in these small towns in western Minnesota? It comes from your Social Security payments, and it comes from Medicare and Medicaid payments. So that is contributing to the economy, and right now it's around $10 trillion across the country, and as people age, of course, if you just do the math, it's going to be an even greater share of the economy. So I think it's John Coughlin wrote the book, The Longevity Economy, and that's what he proved. And Chris Farrell, if you listen to him on NPR, talks about this a lot too, that as our population gets older, it's not the silver tsunami, it's not a drain on our healthcare system, it is contributing to the national product. People are living longer, they're working longer, and they're participating in the economic system. So here's the next question. Kate, if you're ready with the mic, what do you think older people spend their money on? I guess you could just shout it out. Travel, there's plenty of that. What else? Healthcare, certainly, yes. That employs a lot of people, right? Grandkids spend, what do you buy for your grandkids? College tuition, yeah. The share of people who, the parents are out of the equation, and Linda knows all about grandparents who are taking care of their grandkids with the parents out of the picture, that's for sure. So even thinking that people are retired and they're traveling and just doing all this, that isn't the reality for a lot of people. They're taking care of their grandkids. My mother-in-law, she's babysitting today for the dog. Yeah, and it's more than half the money that gets spent in the United States of America is spent by older people. I talk about similar statistics with our fraud and identity theft kind of information. Why do the scammers target older people? Because that's where the money is. It's in the United States of America, and it sits with older people. And I don't know, challenge those outdated beliefs. I might as well, since I brought it up, that older people don't even get scammed more than younger people do. In fact, people age 20 to 39 reported losing money to fraud and identity theft twice as often as older people did, age 70 plus. So anyone going around talking about how older people get victimized because they've lost their cognition or they're too trusting or naive about technology, it's simply not true. Young people 2 times as often are being victimized. Contributing to the economy as volunteers, don't forget to sign up with James and Friends & Co. to give your time, and giving to charity. And then at AARP, we can't say enough about the value of unpaid family caregivers who are the backbone of our healthcare system, people taking care of their parents, people taking care of their spouses. That is really what is stressed by our aging, is really on families and the social connections that we've been discussing all morning. And making plenty of charitable contributions. So that's my demographic part. Did I do that fast enough for all of you who are already expert on the fact that we're all getting older and living longer, and it's going to be a bigger percentage of our population? This is a definition of ageism. That I am forgetting the man who identified it, but he's was the founder of the National Institute on Aging. But it's systematic stereotyping and discriminations against older people based on their age. At AARP, one of the ways that we are sparking new solutions to the challenges and problems of ageism is through a partnership with Getty Images. If any of you are in marketing, you would know about putting pictures like the one you see on your slide into your presentations and your materials, and older people are not represented. As you can see from the statistics on the slide, we just don't have a lot of positive images of aging. So that's your next question, and we will use the microphone for this one. What do you see in the media about older people and about aging. Can I start, Jay? Yeah, please. If your mic works.
There we go. I don't want to turn this into a political discussion or talk about politics, but it's a very topical issue. And there was an op-ed article in the Star Tribune this morning. The headline said, "One election, two aging brains." One candidate running for president is 78 years old, and the other candidate running for president is 81 years old. And we're going to hear a lot about how does age play into these political roles. Now, if you recall, our founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution in Philadelphia back in the late 1700s, put into the Constitution that a person needed to be 35 years old in order to be qualified to be a president of the United States. But they didn't put in a limiting age. Now, one of the reasons they didn't is that back in the 1780s, not many people lived beyond 55 or 60. So they didn't think about anybody being in their late 70s or early 80s running for the president of the United States. But think about how that plays into the idea of ageism as they think about, is someone too old to be our president?
Perfect example. I really appreciate that. And did you hear what they did in North Dakota? They put an upper age limit on who they could elect to Congress. In North Dakota, I think it's 80 years old, right? Yeah, that law passed on the ballot, So what else? That's a perfect example. What else do you see about aging in advertising, in the media? Wrinkles are bad, that's for sure. How much money could you spend to get rid of your wrinkles? Yeah, a whole lot. Yeah. What else?
Here, I'll come over.
Older couples on medication, but walking blissfully on the beach hand in hand.
Yeah, what's up with that? Everyone's riding bikes and walking on the beach and taking their medications, right? What's up with two bathtubs on the end of a dock? I don't know what's up with that. Up here, Kate, you're gonna get your steps in today, that's for sure.
Yeah, this was a related comment that we need a great deal of medicine.
For some reason, it's not on, yeah.
It's that we need a great deal of medicine. And if we can't pay for it, they might be able to help us. But yet we're living these wonderful lives, and we apparently have enough money to do everything. And be happy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, at AARP, we worked really hard on reducing the price of prescription drugs and allowing the government, Medicare, to negotiate on the price of drugs, so that's changing over time, but they're still certainly getting our money, that's for sure. What do you see about the different generations interacting together? Oh, yeah, please, go right ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one of my sort of pet peeves is that in a lot of the advertising that you see, in a lot of the movies that you see, and a lot of conferences that you go to, including this one, seem to imply that you can stop aging. You can't stop it.
Right. Yeah, we're all headed in the same direction, that's for sure. But the media and advertisers have different ideas about what inspires us to spend their money on the products that they have. But how about that question about generations? What role do you see? Why aren't there any young kids in all these medication ads? You don't see that very often, right? Maybe you can think of an example where I'm wrong, but you just don't see different generations together. What's the TV show with Kathy Bates in it, where she talks about feeling invisible and she disappears on the New York City sidewalks? Yeah, so some of that is changing and it's resonating with people, But still, we have a long way to go when it comes to how aging is viewed by the mainstream media and those who are consuming it. So this came up, well, we were just talking about this. Your heart is pretty good for your age. So here's where we have an opportunity to challenge those outdated beliefs. You look great for your age. It's fantastic that he's still working. When's the last time that one of you who would not consider yourself a young lady was called a young lady? You get that? Yeah? So we're crossing it out.
So Jay,
yeah, Bill.
You know what the guy who was a teenager forever? Anybody remember who the teenager forever was? Dick Clark, exactly. What did he say? Age is only a number. Don't you agree with that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we can all stay teenagers forever as long as we remember age is only a number.
How about this for thought? Is would you, if you had the choice right now, would you want to be 25 years old again? Yeah, didn't know anything. At least I speak for myself. I didn't know very much. I thought I did. Didn't have any money. I appreciated having the experience, but I wouldn't go back to being 25 in the way. I wish I could go back to being 25, but only if I knew everything I know now. This is one of our executives, and I think we're saying that we've made the commitment. How about this? Does anyone here work in equity and inclusion, or perhaps as a volunteer you've been involved with an organization that was creating an equity and inclusion plan? And if you'd be willing to share, did they discuss or include age when they were developing your policies and such?
Yeah, hi everyone. So for a little bit of background, I'm a public health educator with a local government, St. Louis County up in Duluth, Minnesota. And our aging and adult health unit just kind of stepped into the community work game. Before it was all just managed care and governmental assistance. But we do have a little group of us that work on health, equity, and inclusion and diversity. So now we finally started adding that aging and adult health lens to that. And we're really just in the beginning works of it, so I don't really have a ton to share with it. But before with the panelist, it was mentioned cultural diversity, and that's something that we've been really looking into too, because just how age and like elders and older community members are valued in different cultures and just kind of different layers to that. We've been starting to study and look into a little bit, but yeah.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Really appreciate that. Who else? Have you been involved in these efforts, and how does age layer in the work that you've done? Yes. It's about 4,000 steps. I'm keeping track for Kate.
Hi, I work for Trellis, and we have Juniper is representing us today as well, and the Senior Linkage Line. We get grant money to help underserved populations in our community. And so our agency has been very intentional about hiring people that look like the people we serve, that speak like the people we serve, and speak multiple languages, so we can develop that trust and get the people the help that they need.
I would agree. Trellis is really leading the way. They're the metropolitan area agency on aging, doing aging services here, and they have very much a focus on hiring a diverse staff who can relate to the changing demographics in the metro area. That's for certain.
So, and I'll just add one thing. So I've done some work around workforce and just older workers, and I think the statistic is only 8% of employers look at age as one of their diversity areas that they want to focus on. So there's an evolving understanding that age is a diversity issue in companies that we need to also be considering.
Yeah. So you met Sherry Pugh earlier this morning. She's the chairperson appointed by Governor Walz to lead the Governor's Council on an Age-Friendly Minnesota, the governor and his office and our state has enrolled in the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities, which is a mouthful. Kirsten Olson is here. She's the executive director now of Age-Friendly Minnesota. What our state has done and what 24 now local communities in Minnesota have done is enroll in this network. And it's not a stamp of approval that now you're the best place to retire or anything like that, but instead it's a commitment by our state, it's a commitment by these local communities to assess the features, whether it's across the state of Minnesota or whether it's in little town of Lind in western Minnesota, to assess the features that make it an inclusive place for people of all ages, and I always stress, including older adults, because when sort of development is left to itself, it's often the older adults who are left out of the equation. So communities assessing their features and their environment for inclusiveness of older adults, and they go through a 5-year cycle of creating an action plan and implementing improvements, whether it's to the built environment, like the parks and the roads and the housing infrastructure, or whether it's the social environment, like Friends & Co. and the other programs that are available to keep people socially connected, or whether it's the service environment, like your healthcare and like the communication system that helps keep everyone informed of what's needed where they live. And I'll just give a great example from Northfield, Minnesota, where this council was formed, and they made the commitment with leaders from local government and residents. And one of their first orders of business, because the city was working on its strategic plan at the same time that Age-Friendly Northfield was being formed, they have a lot of new immigrants in Northfield, so the residents and leaders there had identified inclusion as a part of their new strategy. And the age-friendly group was able to have some influence with the city, and while the draft documents and plan did not include age as a factor for inclusion, they got that to be a part of their strategic plan. So that's our program, and it's a way that in your communities that older adults could be better represented by having that sort of a presence in your town to influence other parts of the government and other parts of your civic life to make sure that older people are at the table. We've been doing the same thing in Olmsted County, where Rochester is, and many other places. I mean, Melinda's here for Mankato. They're doing it in Mankato just the same. I can't name all the names, but Olmsted County and Rochester is a great example too, because our state and many private companies are investing billions of dollars into development in Rochester and Olmsted County. But the older people in the community were saying, well, we are reading the newspaper, not every day, every week, the local newspaper there. And we see all this about attracting younger workers to be in Olmsted County, where we're going to create all these jobs. We hear a lot about all the commuters that need to get back and forth to downtown to go to work. But what about us? We've lived here for 40 years, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of activity and improvement and development happening for the people who just want to live the rest of their lives in Olmsted County. But now age-friendly Olmsted County is able to have some organized influence, whether it's with the city council or the county board or the Destination Medical Center that is steering a lot of the economic development there in the county. Now, age discrimination. Let's see. Let's just put it all out there. Who has felt like you've been discriminated against based on your age and is willing to talk about it?
I am 70 now. When I was 41, I applied to a law firm for a job and had a wonderful interview over the phone, and so I showed up for the in-person interview. Mind you, I was 41 at the time. I had just it was summer, I had bought a beautiful new pink linen suit, and I thought I looked as good as I ever have, and got to the door, and the young attorney opened the door to let me in, and he took one look at me, put his foot in the door, held the door like this so I couldn't get in, and informed me there was no job. I'm 70 now, so, and that was when I was 41. And I think that was the first time that I actually felt a real slap in the face for age.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And as many of you probably know, that's where the age discrimination federal law takes effect, is age 40. We worked on, at the federal level, I certainly didn't have anything to do with it, but changing the structure around age discrimination laws. If you wanted to file a workplace discrimination suit based on your religion, your sex, your culture, your nation of origin, it was a different standard than proving age discrimination, in which you had to also show that there were damages that you suffered because of it, while other forms of discrimination were treated differently. So we were able to change that at the federal level a few years ago. Who else? Let's hear some more of these fun stories about being discriminated against.
Jay?
Yeah, Bill. And feel free to jump in whenever in this arrangement we have here.
I like sitting up here and looking out over the audience. You know, I can see a lot of people there. I ought to jump up and help Kate with the microphone, though. I can do that. Insurance companies discriminate us because of our age. You know, your driver's insurance, if you're under 25, I think the insurance on your car is very expensive. You realize that after age 65 and the older we live, the longer we live, the more our insurance rates go up. That's age discrimination. Now, they have their justification about, you know, we're a greater risk at the age of 60 or 70 than we were at 40 or 50, I suppose. But it's still discrimination because of our age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's part of actually AARP's origin story about 65 years ago. And I always wondered, why is AARP endorsing insurance products, and why do we run our driver safety program? Because back in the 1960s, by federal law, and also by common practice in the auto insurance industry, you didn't want to look forward to your 65th birthday, because that's when your auto insurance would be canceled across the board. So your grandparents didn't have auto insurance after they were 65 years in the 1960s. And we worked with, our founders long ago worked with the insurance industry just to understand how we could have insurance products that serve this new population of people that were growing older. So that's part of our foundation story.
Well, and also with our driver safety, you can get a discount on that insurance as well when you take AARP's program.
Yeah, that was part of how it all started and why I work for AARP today, because they were figuring that out 65 years ago.
Is it you? Yeah.
Hello? Okay. I have a question for AARP, of which I am a member. And I've taken the the driver ed course for adults right through, and I become very uncomfortable with the videos because it always shows beautiful women demonstrating everything. And I sit there and I look at the room and I think, this is for us. Why do they have a young, sexy model?
Sure. Yeah, that's a fair criticism. I'll tell you, this is going to come out wrong because it's a different situation if you take the class in person, and a lot of our wonderful volunteers are the ones leading it, but you have a very fair point if that's what you're seeing on the video. And when I'm done here, I will send in a comment card on your behalf. Yes, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess my dad's story is he retired about 3 years earlier than he expected because he just couldn't handle it anymore, that he was being discriminated against. He worked in state government in a regional structure, and they were deciding which region to condense into another one, and of course they took his, and he was the oldest among the regional leaders, and his job was eliminated, and he really suffered for it. I mean, it cost them a lot of money to be on their own private health insurance that they had to pay for, but he just couldn't handle it anymore. So it costs us in terms of, people who are not engaged in the workforce because they're being discriminated against. It costs us in the skills and expertise that we lose because of it, and it costs us all in a big waste of time because we don't treat people the way that they should be treated. I guess that's what I just said. Who identifies with some of these? In the workplace or elsewhere, you've heard someone talk about age in a negative way. I get it. You're too young to work for AARP. I get that all the time, and I have to say, well, if I do a good job, I'll have a nice retirement someday. Didn't get the job. Passed up for promotion, certainly. So I mentioned this at the beginning. Instead, here's an alternative. Here's how we can challenge these outdated beliefs. Here's how we can spark new solutions, and we heard it this morning. Recognizing the individual in everyone. Who's got a strong opinion about the super senior effect? Have you heard of the super senior effect? When they tell the story of someone who's over the age of 70 on one of the morning news shows, what's the story about? They're running a marathon, maybe 100 miles even, right? What else? Jumping out of an airplane? Going surfing? All these super senior effects. Like, let's just talk about the norm. Would that be, who else gets a whole news story because they jumped out of an airplane on their 21st birthday? So let's take some guesses at these. What percentage of people over 65? We're saying 5%. Who else has a guess? Living in nursing homes, 7%. Anyone else want to venture a guess? Who says higher than 7%? Living in a nursing home. 2%. Yeah. And what do you think is the average age for someone who starts a new business? 50? 60? What's the image you see about people starting new businesses? 25, 35. Yeah, 35, wearing a t-shirt. Yeah. Well, we know the average age is 45 years old. And at a time, I haven't looked at it more recently, but at a time, the biggest group of people starting new businesses, I think it was during the pandemic, that's my second one, I still got one more, was over the age of 50. So those are the people starting new businesses, back to that economic activity we were talking about. Who here would like to share an experience they had working with an age-diverse team, people of different ages? One of the panelists Linda was talking about what if the University of Minnesota put together a cohort of people from different generations to work on a problem and come up with solutions. We just did that the other night. We put together these events we call decades dinners, where at your table there'd be someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and we got the idea from a program that we did, not unlike this, but after we'd all cleaned up and put everything away and we wanted to go home, there was one table of people left, and it happened to be the intergenerational table where there was literally someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s at the table, and they wouldn't leave because they were having so much fun connecting with each other. So who's had an experience with the intergenerational team, maybe at your workplace or elsewhere? Please.
Yeah, I'll come with the microphone.
I retired from the University of Minnesota a couple years ago, and when I was going to do that, I said to all my colleagues, I am not going to lose you as colleagues. So I decided I was going to start, we call it the Just Say Yes Social Club. And this Just Say Yes Social Club includes a couple people like me who have retired, and then graduate students that worked with me who are young, and then everybody in between. And it's just been beautiful because they push us when we say just say yes. I mean, they've got us doing things sometimes. And so it's just been wonderful because it's all of those pluses that you see up there, those values, because we didn't just say, well, it's just the retired people. No, it's all of the colleagues that were part of that team.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But our society and our structure tends to segregate us based on age, so you have to do something about it. So I think we'll wrap it up. Bill, what are your final thoughts here?
Well, this has been an interesting discussion. I wish it could go on for a little bit longer. But what I was wondering as you were having this last discussion is, what do you think? Is it more difficult for the younger people to relate to and work with older people, or is it the other way around, that it's older people more difficult for them to relate to and work with younger people? And what should we be doing, what can we be doing to bridge that gap, to bring us a little bit closer together so that there's more opportunity to collaborate across different age groups and to realize the efficiencies and the benefits of doing that? And I think this kind of a program perhaps helps us develop a better perspective on what it's like to be where we are at the stage of our lives and think about what we have to look forward to. There's a bright future out there for us. We just have to convince ourselves to be a part of it.
Well, let's get a couple thoughts about that. Is it harder for you to approach young people, or do you think it's the other way around? Other way around? So she's saying it's the other way around. Young people probably have a harder time going to older people because they've not lived in your shoes, but you have to an extent lived in their shoes.
I work in an environment where there is a person in each decade, 20, 30, 40, 50. Stopping there, we don't have any 60 in our department yet. I'm getting there. Every year we bring in an intern, and it's interesting to see their resistance or maybe hesitation, and I kind of figured out that it's all about expectations. And it's also about me not telling you everything I know and everything I've learned, but it's about me being curious about what you can bring to the table, what I can learn from you, what you can learn from me. And I did ask him after our second conversation to stop comparing me to his mom, because that was a little weird. But it does a lot to the table when you set expectations ahead of time when working with intergenerational coworkers, or even in a meeting, a community meeting, bringing people to try and make decisions. Expectations on what we expect from everybody, not just based on what your age is, and also instilling curiosity in everyone that you are not the know-all, end-all, be-all, and you're not the hot shot right out of school. Be curious about everybody and what they can bring to the table.
I like it, and thanks for sharing. So again, it takes work. The differences are real, whether they are natural or that we've created them, and so it takes some facilitation to get people comfortably working and connecting with each other. Anyone else with a final thought? One more.
I just want to observe that I think one of the hugest barriers between the generations is technology right now. Our brains at this stage are not wired for the way things are developing technologically. This hasn't so much happened to me, but I know people whose children make fun of them because they can't catch on, they can't do this. And I don't know that's just an observation. I don't know that there's anything we can do about that, but the brain gap, I think, is real because my daughter just, boom. And that's not how the synapses work now. Sure. So what to say about that?
Well, yeah, it's different, and again, it's real. There are real issues and challenges that people have. Our brains work differently. The good news is, in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there are billions of dollars coming to Minnesota for not only the infrastructure it takes to improve internet connectivity across the state in rural places and everywhere, but also there are millions of dollars coming for training. So it's not only AARP, but many of your local libraries, community centers will be beefing up their technology education programs. And because older adults are identified as a target audience, for lack of a better word, we are developing the curriculum that works for older learners to get as much up to speed with the technology as you want to be. So it's taking time. Here, I'll use my third pandemic reference. It was a response to the pandemic, but the funding is just coming out now. And you can get involved in your local digital connection committee to help make all of that happen. With that, it's lunchtime. Thanks for your thoughtfulness and participation and for listening, and I just really appreciate it. So thanks. Bill?
Thank you, Jay. And thank you, Bill. This was a great discussion. Lunch is ready. The booths are open as well, and we'll be coming to the next breakout at 1 o'clock. So thank you.